Joy didn't dare to move an inch, even though Vine threw a glass at him, which he thankfully escaped just by a centimeter. Vine, the same person who was trying to change herself a few days ago, was now in her true form, or something more dangerous than before. She kept her gaze unwaveringly dark, staring at the base of her obsession with Taehyung. His scared expressions were flashing in front of her eyes, taking her peace away with every breath she took. For the first time in her life, she wasn't getting the satisfaction after looking at someone failing her. Master out. Joy took the risk with his life and kept turning even after she ordered him to leave. He knew the consequences, but his loyalty didn't allow him to leave after looking at a situation in which she had lost her mind to sense the pain. Yes, she was holding a sharp in her hand, and the slicing edge of it was digging too deep in her palm. Was bubbling out of the cut and flowing like a waterfall. Yet she was too deep in her thoughts, thinking about him, that she had lost the sense of the reality. Your hand is master, trembled in his place and looked down immediately as she glared at him as if he had committed an unforgivable sin. Looked at her hand and announced the punishment. She made him afraid of me, and for that she'll pay. Who, master? Looked at her in confusion. Kang Wyan took her name in a hateful tone. After a long period of silence, Joy gathered his courage to deliver the news for which he took the risk to come in front of her. Master, you might need this hand to pull the trigger at those who dare to hurt you. In an instant, the sound of metal hitting the marble floor was heard as she had dropped and regained her senses back at the mention of Taehyung, and the situation happened to him. She looked for more like glared at Joy to continue. Her eyes never left his face, watching every flicker of fear. Someone has been pulling strings behind the scene, sabotaging his career. His voice steady but with an edge of caution. The air in the room seems to freeze as she stared at Joy. The thunderous rage in her eyes made him take a step back. No, barely holding back her anger. Taehyung's rival in the entertainment industry. They have been paying off critics, manipulating contracts, spreading rumors, blacklisting him. She stood up with a furious motion, causing her chair to crash against the wall. She slammed both hands on the desk, leaning forward. After a few ragged breaths and failed attempt to control her anger, finally she raised her head and spoke. I want them to know terror. I want them to understand the meaning of pain. Her voice was so cold that it felt like the temperature of the room had dropped suddenly. She pulled out her from the drawer, and a slightly smirk made its way to her lips as she stared at her favorite in her hand. Joy, her voice like a venomous hiss, arranged their funerals. On the other side, Taehyung's POV. I came back from Hawaii and right now I'm on my way to attend director Kunwoo and director Kangmin's funeral. They on the same time, and their funeral is being held on the same day. I still can't digest the fact that the guys who were troubling me till yesterday are not even breathing today. It's almost feeling as if someone did me a favor. But who? Her. His heart and mind screamed at the same time. But why? Muttered under his breath frustratingly as he looked out the window. She had no reason to go after them. Did she? He tried to push the thought away, but it lingered, gnawing at him. Memories of her flickered through his mind, the way she looked at him, the subtle threats laced in her words, and that dangerous gleam in her eyes every time they crossed paths. The sudden halt of car broke the chain of his thoughts, and he stepped out, mentally preparing himself to encounter yet another worst experience of his life. He made his way towards the funeral gathering, nodding politely to a few familiar faces. He stopped walking as his eyes fell on someone who was already approaching him.
Perfect.
Where have you been? I thought someone knew. Jokingly whispered in Thai's ear as he didn't give a single upon those directors. It's not like that, broke the hug and lied with a tight smile. Let's go to their families for condolences. Swiftly change the topic. The bodies haven't arrived yet. Oh, by the way, how are they? That too on the same day. You don't know? Someone, them. Who? His hands trembled slightly as he already knew the person behind it. Don't know. The investigation is still going on. But people are saying the person behind it is powerful enough to not to be questioned. Glanced over his shoulders as if even his words could invite danger. Taehyung's heart pounded harder with each word, confirming his worst fear. He knew exactly who Jungkook was talking about. The worst among worst, the undeniably Mafia Queen, Kang Wyan. His eyes darted to the side, catching nervous glances and fearful expressions. There was a palpable tension in the air, as if everyone here knew something but were too afraid to say it outright. Suddenly he heard gasps all around, which made him look toward the entrance, where everyone had their fearful gazes fixed. Earth slipped from under his feet when he saw her walking inside with the same look he saw when they had their first encounter, when she ended two men in front of his eyes. Little did he know that today history was going to repeat itself once again. He felt his running cold as he crossed him without acknowledging his presence and looked at the open, empty coffin with a frown indicating confusion. What? Oh, so that's what I forgot to do yesterday. My bad. Shook her head disappointingly. Spoke as he was just behind her like a shadow. Wait a minute, master. The bodies are going to arrive soon. Look towards the entrance. There they come. Murmurs and gasps filled the silence once again as Director Pinwoo and Kang walked in. Alive. Everyone was shocked beyond limit, with Taehyung's eyes widened upon the fact that these guys walked into the land stand by their own will. He knew what was about to happen to them as he had encountered the familiar situation before, but he wasn't prepared to witness the plan unfold once again. He was too soft for that.